Welcome back, everybody. The Best Idea Podcast. Stephen Cochran. This is going to be a rough one. So, are all crimes equal? I think the obvious answer is no. Actually, aren't many crimes we can't think of a justification for, depending on the circumstances. If you strike somebody in self-defense, that's justifiable. You just up and hit somebody, that's assault. A desperate person steals food from a convenience store. They might not catch a break legally, but what would we in the public read a story like that and think? Probably look at it with some sympathy, I would imagine, if you knew all the circumstances. If a cop shoots someone, it's clearly going for a gun in their waistband. Even the most ardent defund the police advocate will call that justified. That's just by the measure of the law. When you think about what people would rationalize in their minds, then you can get into crimes justified by groupthink, which is really dangerous. You know, if you're a militant environmentalist, you might not see arson and murder the same way if the headquarters is a major polluter and the board of directors is inside. People can get pretty extreme pretty quick when they believe things. We can. You can commit crimes in the name of religion, find ready-made reasons that partially explain or lessen the seriousness of it because of your beliefs. Sometimes it's hard to put them in a hierarchy, really, as in, what's the worst? Is perjury worse than identity theft? Is arson worse than animal cruelty? It's all situational, right? Even a murder can be justified. Even if a woman's been living with a violent man that beats her regularly, she up and shoots him. Are we going to want to see her in prison? Is she going to be convicted? Not likely. But then there's the exception to all the rules. The exception that no matter what can't be justified or moralized or rationalized or rectified. Rape is a crime that can never be justified. Doesn't matter the circumstance, history that led to it, parties involved, nothing matters. And any crimes at all that involve children. None of our justifications for anything else we may do, adults, when those are applied to children, they evaporate immediately. Doesn't matter what it is. It's one thing we all agree on amid all the noise between ourselves and, kids are off limits to all of it. That's how it's supposed to be. We protect them as a group from individuals that would hurt them. Certainly from organizations that would hurt them. I think we have some institutions, some organizations that have special expectations in that mission. Schools, daycares, churches would take extra care to protect children because of the nature of what they are. Well, recently there was a report that came out of France that studied how we're doing in that regard. Now, it only pertains to France, but I think there's clearly lessons about the rest of the world too. It's not the first of its kind, but it is unique in the depth and extent that the investigators went and how much information was collected. And this report found that over the past 70 years, nearly 3 generations of people, that between 200,000 and 300,000 children were the victims of sexual assault in that country just by Catholic priests. If you listen to me at all, you know I hate language that is designed to make things sound better than they are. I count that term sexual assault among them, chiefly among them. So between 200 and 300,000 children were molested and raped by priests in the Catholic Church. This is not an unfamiliar story, the idea of children being violated by Catholic priests. But the scope of this story, I think, should lead to a change in heart for a lot of people. And the truth is that nobody really knows how big this problem is, how far it has gone. It was in the 1980s in Lafayette, Louisiana, that Father Geith made headlines for molesting and raping children at the school that he worked at. The nuns knew about it. Every time a kid was summoned to his office, they knew what he was doing to them. They would just shudder and pray, and then they finally complained to a bishop who did nothing, and they did nothing. I mean, we could take a world tour, forgive the jumping around a little bit, but the Philippines, 2002, church apologized for sexual abuse, including child abuse by 200 priests over the previous 20 years that they found out about. 2003, same country, 34 priests suspended for rape, 20 of them from a single diocese. In Croatia, 2000, priest convicted of raping 37 girls. Only got 1.5 years in jail, by the way. In Connecticut, 2001, a court found 6 priests had molested and raped boys for 20 years in one diocese. A diocese is like a county or parish if you're in Louisiana. Brazil, a priest was arrested for raping children after he was found in a hotel room with 4 teenage boys. Germany, 2018, it was found that over 1,000 priests had raped 4,000 kids. Pennsylvania, 2018, a report citing 300 priests raping and molesting over 1,000 kids, which was famously reported about in the Boston Globe when they made that movie Spotlight from it. And you'll have to forgive me for not mentioning the specific rape, child molestation cases in Japan and Belgium and the Netherlands and Kenya and India, Ireland, Australia, Norway, Sweden, South Africa, Portland, Scotland, Peru, Chile. We don't have time to go through them all. And now we have this report from France. And like I said, really a first of its kind, meaning the detail in the investigation. Half of the population of France is Catholic, okay? So that's between 30 and 40 million people. So it's damn near 10% of the entire Catholic population involved in this study. I mean, imagine the countries where that percentage of Catholics is higher. Most Catholics are found in the third world, where every crime is easier to conceal. Child molestation would be even easier to conceal. I mean, what laws are there to protect them? What supervision is there to make sure laws are followed? Where would you report child rape in Burundi or Rwanda? I mean, let's use that 10% number. There's 1.3 billion Catholics in the world, roughly. How many millions of children have been rape victims of this one organization? And we'll never know, because the rules are set for themselves. It wasn't always the case. Actually, the majority of the history of that church, they were very good about outing people that didn't belong, people that committed any crime. And then around 1917, Pope Benedict changed the rules. and he installed the Code of Canon Law, applicable to all Roman Catholic churches. And only the Pope, this is important, only the Pope could issue or change canon law. So it's something you got to remember about this organization. It is not run like some democratic government or anything like that. The Pope has full control over the entirety of the Catholic Church, which makes sense because he is considered to be a representative of Christ. When he speaks on moral issues, practicing Catholics believe that he is infallible. He cannot be wrong when he does that. And then it was made worse by another pope a few years later, 1922, when Pope Pius issued a decree that created the privilege of clergy by imposing the secret of the Holy Office on all information obtained through the church's own investigations. If the state didn't know, there wouldn't be a trial. They weren't going to say anything. They would handle it all internally. And the next few subsequent popes continued this decree. They reissued it. Actually, it was extended to allegations themselves. It wasn't even about finding out about crimes. It was just the allegations of crimes. Those would become secret as well. Then Pope John Paul II confirmed that again. The next guy, Benedict, the one that was there before the current pope, extended it further to allegations about priests sexually abusing intellectually disabled adults. So this is not something that has just happened over time for no reason. This is something that's been deliberately covered up for decades in order to protect the people doing it and the organization itself. I mean, these investigations they do their own trials too. And bishops have to try and reform the priests before putting them on trial. Where, of course, they could just say, I couldn't control myself, hate the sin, not the sinner, this sort of stuff, which is, those sorts of arguments carry weight in a setting of just priests and bishops. They can just plead forgiveness and be forgiven by people that know them and have an interest in protecting them. I mean, it makes you wonder if something about the church attracts people like this, or does this system make them? I mean, it's easy to imagine that, if you grow up Catholic and you realize at some point in your life that you have this strange, gross attraction to children, you'd want to go be as close to God as possible, constantly beg for his mercy. And then you just happen to fall into a system that's allow you to indulge in your child rape fantasies and be protected legally and spiritually. I mean, the structure of the church is that the Pope is at the top. He has total authority over every single person employed at that church. He's head of the country, Vatican City. And then you have cardinals. There's about 200 of them worldwide. They're appointed by the Pope. They advise him. And when he dies, they elect a new Pope. And beneath that, you have archbishops, they're over a certain amount of territory. Then you have bishops, kind of the same thing. Think of like general manager and manager. And then you have priests, and then you have deacons. And deacons are not ordained. They can get married. They can help in sacraments and things. So how does such a disgusting and obvious pattern of child rape make it into and past such a well-formed organization? the cover, the alibis, it's all built into the system. They use confession. They tell each other their secrets and then keep it secret. Because as the head of the French bishops said when this report came out, confession is above the laws of the Republic. That is what the people running this organization believe. That if one of their underlings, a priest or anybody, comes to them in confession, somebody that is willing to molest and rape children comes to them in confession and confesses it, and they seem sincere, they can be forgiven and nobody else has to know. Imagine the ego one must have to think that that's all that need be done. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of that bishop that thinks that he can wave that away. Never mind the person actually committing the crimes. Just the person that's waving his hand at them. It's what they believe. No need to concern the rest of us. It's between them and God. Don't judge the sinner. That sort of nonsense. And they had, the Pope exercising some authority, they had some rules changed recently. Because, you might think to yourself, well, obviously, going back to 1930, there's constant reporting about rape out of this one organization. It's one entity. They're all connected. You'd think that they would change some of the rules, that a pope, a well-meaning pope, would just change the rules. You think about being at the head of a giant organization, and you might take a while to institute rule changes because there's a lot of people and there's a lot of moving parts and things going on. But imagine something like this having to be done. This doesn't take a long time. You don't wait on this. You sign on day one. The new rule that anybody who confesses to molesting or raping children or any violent crime, let's say, we'll leave you alone on the nonviolent crimes, must be turned in to the civil authorities immediately. Call the cops now. So what did he do, this current pope? Well, he made a new office for the investigations. And he made it against church law to groom people into roles of being abused. Because that's a huge component of what happens. These like any other religion, families that are Catholic, practicing Catholics, are very respectful of priests. My grandmother was Catholic. She raised me Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. And the reverence you had for the priest was unmistakable. They were a representative of the church and by extension, a representative of the Pope, who is supposed to be on earth for God. It's a very deep thing, like it is for anybody that practices religion. And probably the most disgusting aspect of this, besides the physical acts themselves, which are obviously grotesque, is the grooming. The little conversations that are being had to prepare a child for this sort of thing. Making them feel comfortable with this. So he made that against the church law. Oh, well, and there's a threat in there that a priest that's engaged in child rape, they might be defrocked. Maybe. They might be kicked out of the Catholic Church. Maybe. That's not typically their MO to kick them out. Normally they move them around. That's the norm. Maybe. That same head of the French bishops suggested that the church pay contributions to the rape victims that would be paid for by donations. That was his contribution to the conversation. Separate the organization from the religion. There's a guy named Richard McBrien who wrote a history of the church called The Church. He is a professor of theology at Notre Dame. He's written several books on the Catholic Church. And he describes it as the community of those who confess the lordship of Jesus and strive to live by his example. That's it. That is what it means to be a Catholic. That's all it takes. The massive complex and the lying and the secrecy and wealth doesn't improve your connection to God. You don't need these people. And if you donate time and money to this organization, knowing its history, you're going to bear some of the blame. They can't do this without money. It wasn't the grace of God that paid the legal fees for the high-powered lawyers that defend these priests in court, or the $4 billion they've paid out in legal fees and lawsuit settlements and hush money. $4 billion over the last 50 years. Divide that, it's still a shit ton of money. All starts in the collection plate. And the bankruptcies. Dozens of these churches in the United States have gone bankrupt because they get sued so often for molesting kids. Portland, Tucson, Spokane, San Diego, Wilmington, Delaware, Milwaukee, Stockton, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the report that we cited a little while ago, Buffalo, New Orleans, Louisiana, had an explosion of information not long ago. What is this? Imagine if this were the public school system. And we found out that from the top, Secretary of the Department of Education to the administrators and the teachers and the janitors and the assistant teachers, cafeteria staff, were raping thousands of kids a year. That every time the principal asked a student to the office, they were being molested. Teachers were found to have repeatedly asked students to stay after class to groom them, talking them into ideas so they'll be more compliant with being molested. And they had a system, a method by which to move these men to different schools when it became too apparent to too many parents that the man is a rapist. How do you think we would react to that? Here's how I think it would. The entire department, the whole thing from top to bottom, would be disbanded. And control would be turned over to the states, at least temporarily, if this were to come out. There would be people in the streets demanding trials and prosecutions and all of that. But there aren't here. This report came out over a week ago. And there's none of that. Where's the outrage? Where are the movements? I don't see the Me Too movement having much to say. These rapes aren't as important because they're not grown women having to deal with this awful shit. We've got the MAD organization, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Where's Mothers Against Pedophile Priests? MAP. Where are the staunch anti-abortionists? The people who would put a would-be mother in prison for an abortion. We get nothing when those children are born and then sodomized by priests and nuns. And it's nuns as well. I keep saying men because that is the vast majority of the people that do this. But for example, in Scotland, there was an 8-year-old that was being molested by a nun for years. She finally got the courage up to tell the priest at her school. After that, the priest and the nun were arrested because they raped her together. The silence here is fucking inexcusable, and it's revolting. There should be protests by Catholics outside every single church in the world rather than sitting their asses in a single pew. So what will the defenders say? There are people that are in denial of this. Head in the sand. If people don't want to see something, they won't. But they'll have to deal with that in the mirror. When you look at all of this information, there's no way to deny what's going on. And if they truly believe in the Catholic doctrine, if they really do believe in that church and in its mission and in the afterlife, as Catholics believe that it will be, then they at least will have to live with the knowledge that each of them will spend an eternity in hell. Without exception. Not a single truly believing Catholic, if they end up being right, that after you die, there's a heaven and a hell, and hell is an absence of God and the worst place that one could imagine, if one could imagine it, juxtaposed to heaven, which is, the best place where you spend the rest of your life in relationship with God. This is what Catholics believe. You will be going to hell. And then there's others that focus on the sin. Sin is a major focus of Catholics. Forgiveness and what sins you committed, and repenting and penance and guilt. As soon as one admits a sin, one can be forgiven as long as you really feel sorry. One is forgiven by the mortals, and the rest is left to God. We must forgive, they say. Imagine if this were an individual in your own life, though. Not a priest. But how many good things could a person do that would rectify molesting a child? How many prayers must he say before you invite him back over for dinner? Some would say that the church has done a lot of good things. The institution is bigger than the people in it. I mean, we're talking about the salvation of souls here. But at what cost? So, on a personal level, what is your own salvation worth? Is it worth the life of a child? What about 10? What about 100? What about your child? What is the protection of one's own salvation worth while you're here? And in the Catholic Church, it operates like a government with taxes. It uses the money, the billions of dollars, to influence other governments and pay the legal fees of defending pedophiles in court. Can't forget that part. It uses the money to move them to different places. It uses it to pay victims to be silent. $4 billion. And it's a red flag that many of the people at the top are obviously a fraud in their own beliefs. Because if they truly believed, as Catholics do, they would know that they were destined to go to hell for covering this up. The people committing these offenses, you could easily imagine, are just sick motherfuckers, not in their right mind. But it's the ones that cover, the ones that have actually never touched a child inappropriately in this organization that are the most dangerous. If there were no one to cover, this would be dealt with. They allow these vermin to build relationships and infest our communities. The stories out of all these countries are horrific and vile. I mean, sisters being shared between priests who would take turns going to their home for dinner. Or Father Stokic that raped a girl, got her pregnant, got her to lie to her parents about it, and then arranged the abortion. You'd say he doesn't represent the church. But the guy at the top that hears that, and tens of thousands of other cases like that, and just says, move them. Move them somewhere else. He does represent it. I mean, you go up each part of the chain. At what point do I find a representative? I think we could argue that, at the very least, the Pope is a representative. And he's also in a position to know exactly how horrible this problem really is. We don't even know how much he knows. And everything that we are privy to is it's almost unimaginable. It's hard to believe the numbers because they're so big and they come so often. But the Pope knows all of it, or at least he can know all of it. He can know everything he wants to know. So before we get into what I think is the best idea moving forward, what can be done to rectify this? Obviously, I won't speculate on what can be done to make whole the millions of children, most of them under the age of 14 years old, that have been raped and tortured by sadistic old men who believe themselves to be endowed with the power of God. Or, with power from God. I remember a Christopher Hitchens quote where he referred to priests and the conclave of cardinals that votes for the Pope as a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins that have betrayed their charge in the history of their own church and the children of their own church. So there's no way that I can think of. I wouldn't presume to be able to think of a way to help those children. I mean, what are you going to do? Pay the therapy bills? What the fuck can you do? But before we get into what they can do, what the Roman Catholic Church has to do to prevent this in the future, before that, just to the people that still practice Catholicism, just separate the organization from the religion. You don't need these people, is what I'm saying. And I'm not naive. I know that this church won't go away. There's too many people that believe in the tenets of the church, the ideal of the church. But I'm not naive. It'll take nothing less than what I'm about to describe for that organization to recover a shred of credibility very far in the future. The first thing I mentioned earlier is that all donations to the church have to stop immediately, and for the reasons that we talked about already. There has to be a papal decree, the Pope decree, that any and all documents or witnesses to any form of sexual violence or any violence are immediately handed over under the threat of excommunication. Either you give everything you know to the police, or you'll be excommunicated, which means you'll be not only kicked out of the church, but you won't be able to receive the sacraments. which is important to Catholics. Release all records regarding priests to the authority. Open book. Every priest that's known to have been involved goes to jail immediately for the remainder of his life. So the only way to get there is the release of information. Church has to completely rid itself of the legal component of being Catholic. You shouldn't need lawyers. You shouldn't be doing shit but prayer, sacraments, and taking confession. That's it. From the Pope on down. Sell everything. No one actually knows what the church owns and what it's worth. I mean, just the Vatican, most of what the Vatican has in terms of art and sculptures and buildings is all considered priceless. So it would fetch a great deal of money, easily in the hundreds of billions of dollars. They have about $15 billion in the bank that we know of that I could find. The Catholic churches in Germany, Australia, Philippines, collectively worth about $50 billion. Some of the dioceses in the world on their own are worth billions because of the land they own and other assets. You sell it all, except the individual churches. We're going to need those in a minute. Should fetch hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe $1 trillion. Pay that money directly to the local government where the assets were sold, and they can use it to cover expenses of victims or issue it to nonprofits that work in that field. People can vote on how that money is spent. You don't need any of that infrastructure. Mass can be done anywhere. Confession can be taken anywhere. There are churches all over the world. Which brings me to the next thing. All church officials live in churches. The Catholic churches don't pay taxes. Keep that. It's fine. It's about 400,000 priests, plus bishops, archbishops, monsignors, popes, cardinals, all of them. Live poor, as you were called to do, as Jesus did. Technology we have now, any group can exist without a headquarters. The Pope can send his edicts out through Twitter or email. And whatever you have left in the priesthood, because there are large numbers of priests quitting, but whatever you are left, priests, bishops, all of you, all of them, allow them to get married. Encourage families in your organizations. Bring women into your organization in leadership roles. I mean, part of what it means to join this church is that its employees, most of them, they volunteer to sacrifice their ability to have sex. The rules state that you cannot have sex with anyone. I'm pretty sure you have to be a virgin to be a priest, but maybe they'll probably forgive you for that and allow you in any way. But I mean, it's such a primitive thing to keep from a person, other than, all other companionship and food. Let some of the natural world into this system. Allow women in the decision making. You need the perspective. I mean, much of this can be done by the Pope himself, if not all of it. Now, by we, I mean everyone outside the church. If we should find these things not happening, that these real reform moves that would have to happen, then there are some other things that should happen that we can do. Firstly, Vatican City is a country, and the church uses that status often for sovereign immunity. It happened just a few days ago when there were lawsuits against the Vatican itself because all the power structure is in the Vatican, which is a very small area inside of Italy. Italy could revoke the treaty that made the Vatican City a country in the first place, called the Lateran Treaty. If they can't outright revoke it, they could amend it to subject them to taxation and oversight. I mean, look, Italy could use the money anyway. Every country needs to pay for and prioritize a deep, extensive look at this church in detail and its affiliated groups to see how much of this has actually gone on. In the U.S., Biden can do it. Say, I don't care why he does it. Say, he could say he's being a true Catholic and holding the church accountable. Republicans can call for it to make Biden look bad because he's Catholic. I don't give a fuck how it gets done, but every state needs to do this. Merkel in Germany is Catholic. She could do it on her way out. She's part of the Catholic Party in politics. She needs to do it. All church property other than the churches can be confiscated over time. Eminent domain. Orphanages, schools, seminaries, all of it. It couldn't be done quickly, but it could be done. Access to children, basically, has to be limited severely. You don't need anything but a church. Teaching new priests can be done in a church. There'll be a lot of Catholic people that this whole episode enrages. My guess would be that what I would want to say to you is, it is strange to hear from someone that we must force a pregnant woman to carry a baby to term, but we cannot intercede when men are raping babies. That's troubling. As a religion, Catholicism falls among the rest. It has the same benefits and drawbacks that we can find in any religion. They shouldn't be especially penalized or praised for those. But as an institution with a history, as a company with an income and a president and accountants and lawyers and PR firms, as a union designed to protect its members first and the consumers second, as an organization with power and authority, it's proven uniquely dangerous. You've probably heard the expression, for God's sake, just kind of flippantly thrown out there to implore you to do something. But with this, you could say it more literally. I mean, for the sake of God, for the sake of His image, the God you believe in, you have to make some change, some very serious change. And for the church itself, the organization, to follow through on any of this, any of it, anything that I just listed here, which sounds like pie in the sky, not doable, idealist or whatever. I don't believe in any of that shit. The world is just nature and decisions. And it isn't nature stopping these sorts of things from happening. But to follow through on all of it would just be a beginning. It's 1/1,000,000th of what is owed. So as always, send me your comments, thoughts, questions, corrections, thebestideapodcast@gmail.com. Please comment, follow the show. If you like the content of any episode, share it with people, see where they stand, start a conversation. I'm on Twitter @thebestidea, Instagram as The Best Idea Podcast. Finally got that done for taking too long. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next time.